couple of things that haven't been in the conversation. One I was asked to do, which is talk specifically about the interface between the Trump administration and science. That'll be the second thing. But first, I would like to make a point that I think, particularly for those from outside the United States, when you look at us and try to figure out what is going on, there are clearly effects of a new nationalism, but there are also many things that are happening that are just the nature of the individual who has been elected president. And so we have some phenomena that you would think are most unlikely. For example, the president ran for office with much of his platform being the failure of conventional government. And therefore, for legislation pushed by the administration to fail in Congress is not necessarily regarded as a bad thing. It reinforces the image that he ran for president on. Secondly, much of his platform was recovering lost jobs from the Rust Belt. And that gets spoken of in the context of what those jobs were, and it has led us to a coal miner's view of the world, which I'll say a little bit more about later. The president is actually looking pretty good in terms of what's happening to the economy because he inherited an improving economy, and it can look as if it is his policies that are enabling that improvement in the economy, which I don't think is the case. He has this feature of impetuosity and jumping from one position to another, which I think is associated with the art of the deal, to the extent I understand the art of the deal. But that is another thing that puts him in one world and his influence with what actually happens being much less. And then the morning tweets are a way of relieving emotional tension and a way of being a bad boy without your handlers stopping you from doing it. That, again, limits his influence on the overall process. Let's take the particular case of science and how science is done in the administration. Yes, I would say anti-science is a descriptor of it. Scientific explanations, understanding of climate change and global warming do come into conflict with the coal miner's view of the world, and therefore he ignores those things and works instead from the standpoint of bringing back coal and relying on coal for our fuels. We have had the phenomenon of a bunch of in-your-face appointments in the various agencies that deal with sciences. Who knows how the University of California will ever be able to retain the management of the Los Alamos National Laboratory with Rick Perry as the Secretary of Energy, for example. But the Environmental Protection Agency is one particular example where a nihilist on environmental protection was put in there, and various things have happened, reversing rules, letting current science advisors go, and then this most recent thing of taking a stance that no grant recipients could be science advisors to the agency because of conflict of interest. The travel ban has had its influence on science because it has greatly hampered international scientific meetings. There have been efforts to remove words pertaining to climate change from scientific proposals and not be receptive to it. There's the withdrawal from the Paris Treaty, the Paris Accord, which is a terrible world image. And an interesting offshoot from that is the fact that because of the nature of the United States, it has enabled some other people to become champions of control of climate change or countering climate change within this country. For example, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, and Michael Bloomberg were the two stars recently internationally on that subject. And we do have another interesting phenomenon in the United States, which is going to let the Jerry Browns have some influence. Because California is large enough and has the ability to make laws regarding, for example, automobile mileage that actually influence the entire nation, because auto manufacturers are not going to make something different for California. They're going to make for the rest of the country what they make for California. So we are in an interesting situation where the climate change countering is being led from the state level and may actually be rather effective that way. The science budget, I stand about where Bob Shireman does on that. The Trump administration has proposed severe cuts to scientific activities and research. It is not well received by Congress, even by Republicans in Congress. They do favor science and the support of science. And so we're going to have the interesting situation of it being the starving the beast thing that determines the science budget, rather than activities directed or changes directed specifically at science. The problem for science will be that the whole budget may become constrained by what happens on the tax bills here, and that science will be treated evenly in comparison to everything else, but within a much smaller budget. That is the potential problem. But other than that, Congress seems not to be with the president on the anti-science stance. They are believing in science, and they have continued to be pretty strong supporters of it. So those are the observations I wanted to add. I'm not going to go on further so as to leave us time for the discussion.
Thank you.